Good afternoon and good morning to our West Coast listeners. My name is Juan Thomas, Chair of the ABA Civil Rights and Social Justice Section, and welcome to our weekly Chair Chat. Today, I'm honored to have as our guest, Daniel Woofter, who is the Chair of the ABA Death Penalty Due Process Review Project. Daniel, welcome to the Chair Chat this week.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Glad to have you. So Daniel, let's just start off by asking the obvious question for those who may not know. What is the Death Penalty Due Process Project?
The Death Penalty Due Process Review Project was started by the ABA as an effort to bring more equity to the death penalty and its procedures. We have been developing policy, doing amicus briefs, and writing, statistical reviews of the death penalty and how it's administered along a lot of different kinds of metrics, including racial demographics, for decades now.
And you've been chair for how long?
Just 2 years. I'm a pandemic baby of the ABA.
Well, we appreciate your commitment to this work. Tell me this. It's my understanding that there are 27 states that currently still have the death penalty on the books. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And
23 have
Texas is
since abolished it.
Yes. And one of them is Texas, correct?
Yes. Texas is certainly one of the states that still has the death penalty.
I bring that up because you are counsel in a very important case in Texas involving a defendant by the name of Escobar. Could you share with us that story and its connection to the work that you're doing with the ABA?
Sure, yes. My client was convicted of capital murder in 2011 in Travis County in Texas. And it later came to light that the DNA evidence that was used in the trial was false and misleading. And in fact, the DNA lab, the forensic lab that was part of the Austin Police Department, was found to be so abjectly out of line and had been violating scientific norms and cross-contaminating evidence to such an extent that the lab was shut down. And even though the original intent was to reconstitute it, the board in Texas determined that it couldn't be. It had failed too big. So my client had already gone through his first his first state habeas proceeding, but brought a second one on the basis of newly discovered evidence. Mm-hmm. And the federal or the state habeas court in Texas agreed with him after 2 years of testimony, essentially taking evidence and hearing the case, that he was entitled to habeas relief because his due process rights were violated when false evidence was used to convict him. On appeal to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, which is Texas's highest court for criminal cases, the prosecutor actually agreed that my client should have his conviction vacated. And despite that, and despite hundreds of pages of fact findings and conclusions by the habeas court below, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals issued a 3-page affirmance of his conviction, rejecting the habeas claims, and did not even mention that the state prosecutor had agreed that habeas relief is warranted. At that point, Ben Wolf, who's the head of the capital litigation section in Texas, reached out to our firm. And I think in part because I've been doing this work with the ABA as the chair of the Death Penalty Due Process Review Project. It's a lot of words. We're confident that I could help in seeking certiorari in the Supreme Court. And it so happens that I also I'm a partner at a law firm, Goldstein and Russell, based in Bethesda, which specializes in Supreme Court and appellate litigation. So we filed a petition asking for summary reversal, which is something the Supreme Court rarely does, but we think this is such a straightforward case. That the standard for vacating a conviction that was obtained on false evidence like this is there has to be any reasonable likelihood that the outcome could have been different.
Right.
And what we have here is, even in the record, one of the jurors actually testified in a hearing after the conviction that he was on the fence as to Mr. Escobar's guilt until he saw the DNA evidence. I
Wow.
rarely see a straightforward case. This really feels like one.
Wow.
And the petition, in what I think is a hopeful sign, has been relisted now five times by the Supreme Court, which it always does when it summarily reverses. It doesn't mean that that's what we're going to get here. It could still grant, it could deny with a dissent. But we have all of our fingers and toes crossed for my client.
Wow. That is amazing that not only did the juror testify to that, but the prosecutor also thought the conviction should be vacated. Amazing.
It's extremely unusual. I mean, we even have, they filed a response to our petition saying, yes, please, Supreme Court, summarily reverse and have them vacate this conviction. And we have amicus briefs, including by former attorneys general and U.S. attorneys from both sides of the aisle, saying, this is wrong, and you should, in fact, summarily reverse in this case.
And the ABA also submitted an amicus brief as well, correct?
Yes. I was very, very thrilled. I, of course, was not involved in that process. I couldn't be, but the ABA, as you well know, rarely files at the petition stage. And not only did the ABA file at the petition stage in this case, it also actually recommended relief, which it rarely does too. So sort of two layers of rare occurrences should just show how wrong the decision was in this case. Right. Where the stakes couldn't be higher.
Yes, well, we hope that we will get a favorable decision soon from the Supreme Court in that case that you're handling. Thank you for that work. Critically important. Could you speak kind of broadly about the work of the review project? What things are you all working on currently that you could share? And then specifically, could you talk about in what ways can lawyers, particularly lawyers who are committed to civil rights and social justice, get involved in the work of the death penalty review project?
Sure. I mean, I can start by saying how I got involved, which was that one of the things that the project does is file amicus briefs on behalf of the ABA in certain death penalty cases of interest to the ABA. Generally requires that there be some written policy that the ABA has set forth, which is another aspect of the project. We put forth model policies and recommendations for how, for states that do have the death penalty, how it can be administered as fair as possible. And we can talk about if there is such a world, but, I, speaking for myself, I got involved because there was a Nevada death penalty appeal, and one of the questions in the case was whether the person who is on facing the death penalty could be put to death given his mental incompetence. And the ABA, through the Death Penalty Due Process Review Project, has promulgated recommendations that you can't. So I helped to, I volunteered as a pro bono attorney to file an amicus brief on behalf of the ABA in that case. So one way that aspiring, civil justice attorneys can get involved is to volunteer for those kinds of projects when they come up.
Right.
We're always looking for talented writers who can help to write amicus briefs in these cases for the ABA, as happened in my case in Escobar, which is going to be extremely important to the court to get that view. And we also do some work trying to track and keep a good record of where the states are in their for those 27 states, especially that do still have the death penalty, how they administer it, what the laws are. And in some states, that there are certain kinds of defendants who cannot be put to death, and in others, they don't have those kinds of restrictions. So that's another thing that the Death Penalty Due Process Review Project does. And by way of example, one of the things we're currently doing is trying to update some of our policies. We have some policies on race and the death penalty that are 30 years old and clearly need updating. So we're in the process of doing that right now.
So you speak of policy. In the context of the ABA, are there current resolutions that are being proposed that you would like us to know about specifically, or just broadly you're speaking?
So I guess that's actually the better word. They're resolutions and they're voted on. So thank you. They're not policies technically. So yes, they're resolutions, and those are the positions that the ABA takes on certain topics that the ABA has an expertise in. And the one that I just mentioned is actually one that the project is looking at right now as we speak. We have some members of the committee who are committed to modernizing and updating our race and the death penalty resolutions that that the project has worked on in the past.
Wonderful. So Daniel, one of the issues that we're focused on this year in our section is economic justice. And I think we all know that a lot of death row inmates come from vulnerable communities where there's poverty, where there's not a lot of access to justice. In your work as chair of this project, have you continued to see that reality? And could you kind of just speak broadly as to your observations?
I mean, it's the sad reality, is one of my heroes, Brian Stevenson, would say, is that those who don't have the capital get the punishment. And it so happens that over half of death row inmates currently are Black and Hispanic. And something that's less appreciated, I think, in terms of the implicit bias that infects this process and makes it inequitable, is that the vast majority of death row inmates are on death row because the victim was white. Very rarely is it the case that where there is a minority victim, or rather, most murder victims are Black and Hispanic and other minorities, and they make up a small percentage of the victims who are represented on in death penalty convictions.
Right.
Whether or not you agree with the death penalty, I will reserve, as a representative of the ABA, my own personal view on that. I think we can all agree that the evidence is overwhelming, that implicit bias infects the whole process from start to finish.
Right. It's so important that you remind us of that reality, that so many of these folks who are on death row are there because they have killed or allegedly killed. No, I guess they've been convicted, obviously, by that point. Caucasians. You don't see the reverse very often. There's not a lot of Caucasian death row inmates on death row because they killed people of color, or even Black on Black crime or brown on brown crime. You don't see that as often.
The smallest percentage of death row inmates, I believe, are white perpetrators of crime against a Black victim.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, interesting. Are there some resources that you could point us to for further reading or learning more about these issues specifically? What would you recommend that people in our section or lawyers generally pay attention to with respect to these issues?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because in fact your section itself is a very good collection on the ABA's Civil Rights and Social Justice section, part of the website. of all kinds of materials that the ABA collects in this regard. You can go to the Death Penalty Due Process Review Committee's website as well, where we collect these resources. And I'd say that outside of the ABA, this is just, I've already mentioned that Brian Stevenson is one of my personal heroes,
Yes.
And if there are any, is an angel on earth. And
Have you ever met him?
yes, once, yeah.
Yes.
And at a lecture that he was giving when I was living in Michigan, actually, he came to Ann Arbor. And I clerked for a judge in Michigan, Judith E. Levy. And one of the first things she did is she gave me the book Just Mercy to read. And
great book.
Be you a lawyer or not, that book is written in such a beautiful narrative, but also captures the realities of this punishment that it is incredibly inequitable in how it is administered today. And at the very least, what we have to do is move towards, if we're going to have it be a punishment that can be more equitable.
Yeah, that's a great book that I've read also, and I would recommend that to anyone who cares about issues around the death penalty and civil rights issues. It's a great piece of writing there. Thank you for reminding us of that. Anything that you think we should know that I did not ask you about the project you are chairing? Anything that you want to share as we begin to wrap this up?
Our project is always looking for motivated individuals who are lawyers who may want to participate. I highly encourage any of you to please take a look and join the committee if you're interested, or try. We have, I think we have spots, and we're always looking to fill out with individuals who are motivated by this work and want to make a difference here.
So speaking of that, how does someone join the committee? Do they contact you or follow up with someone else in the ABA? How do they do that?
I think there's actually a process on the ABA's website where you can fill out a form and just select through in radial buttons what committees you might be interested. Yes, there's ours, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that your committee does a lot of work in this realm, and I think we're part of the larger umbrella there. But we're not even the only death penalty project. There's another in the ABA that's more involved directly in some litigation too. So there are many different ways that you can engage in civil rights more broadly, and even in multiple ways in the death penalty projects that the ABA has.
Well, Daniel, I want to thank you for sharing your wisdom and your insight with us this afternoon. Thank you for your work on this project. Thank you for your work on behalf of the Escobar family. And I hope that that is resolved in a way that is indicative of the rule of law and fairness. So thank you for your time today. And thank you all for listening.